Steve Andreas, Six Blind Elephants, page 172. One way to describe the pattern that is common to these two examples is that both the original statement and the response are inappropriate applications of deduced categorical scope. The initial statement categorized something inappropriately on the basis of the single criterion, and then deduced a conclusion based on that categorization. Second, the responder found another example of a similar categorization that was obviously false. And third, the responder matched the initial statement by stating the new example in the exact same linguistic form. This created a parallel between the two statements, putting both statements into the same category. To appreciate the power of this conversational pattern, compare it to the kind of response most people might make in the two situations described above. To appreciate the power of this conversational pattern, compare it to the kind of response most people might make in the two situations described above. No, I'm not a woman, I just like long hair. Or, some women have short hair. Some people use NLP with themselves. Or, even if you can't use it on yourself, it can be used with others. This is a really easy pattern to use because there is no need to gather information to find out how the category is structured or maintained. All you have to do is think of a parallel example that is clearly false and deliver it in the same linguistic form, because the new statement is stated in the same linguistic form as the original statement. It has to be processed in exactly the same way, appearing to be another example that confirms the original statement. Since the new statement has been implicitly placed in the same category as the original statement, when it is recognized as clearly false, it dissolves the original statement. Since the statements in the examples above have the same form as many troubling beliefs that people have about the world of themselves, this pattern can be used to weaken them. For instance, if someone says, "She dumped me, I'll never have a relationship," you can respond, "Yeah, I threw up once, I'll never eat again." Or, "I tried to play the piano once, but nothing came of it, so I stopped." If you think about a troubling statement that someone you know has made repeatedly in the past, you can practice responding in this way and be prepared to respond the next time they say it. After some practice doing this with others, you can even apply this process to any troubling or limiting statement that you make about yourself or events around you. 3. Aggregate categorical scope. When I include an experience in category, it immediately becomes associated with all the other examples in the category, an expansion of scope. Assigning an event to a category joins that event with all the other examples in the category, and this association enriches the experience of any particular example. A category is a collection or aggregation of scopes, making it easier for us to attend to any of the other scopes included in the same category, and harder for us to attend to other scopes that are not included in the category. A category is a collection of aggregation of scopes, making it easier for us to attend to any of the other scopes included in the same category, and harder for us to attend to other scopes that are not included in the category. Aggregate categorical scopes. Scope is an expansion of scope provided by the scopes of all the different examples. Calling the aggregate categorical scope distinguishes it from either observed or deduced categorical scope. Each example in a category will have a scope specified by the criteria for the category, and each example will also have an individual scope that is neither specified nor excluded by the criteria. For instance, one criterion for the category cat might specify that a cat has fur, but not what color it is. Examples of cat include many different colors and patterns of colors, like tabby, calico, or points. This additional information enriches the category for far beyond the necessary criteria, adding additional scopes of sensory-based experience. Even more important, when we assign an experience to a category, it becomes associated with our prototype for the category, which is what we usually use to understand the meaning of the category. Even more important, when we assign an experience to a category, it becomes associated with our prototype for the category. Which is what we usually use to understand the meaning of the category. Take a moment to think of your prototypes for a yard sale and a fine art auction, and it will become obvious why a painting that sells for $10 when surrounded by a clutter of yard sale may sell for 1,000 times that at a major auction house in the company of other fine paintings. John McWhirter once worked with a very young woman who had gotten pregnant after being raped. After some time and considerable thought, she decided to have an abortion. Right after the abortion, due to the doctor's carelessness, she saw the dead fetus lying in the pan, and this image had tormented her ever since. John worked with her to elicit many different images relating to her decision, her memories of the rape, that she was totally unprepared to raise a child alone, that the rapist not only wouldn't make a very good father, but had no interest in being one, etc. Then he had her assemble all these images into a group, along with the image of the fetus in the pan, creating a category of images of different aspects of her decision. When she could see all these images together, she felt a deep sadness at having had to make a very difficult decision between two very unpleasant features. And then she was able to accept that and move on with her life. Once I saw a videotape of Brian Weiss, who developed past life regression therapy, working with a woman who had a phobia. When he was done, I could tell by her nonverbal response that she still had the phobia, but it didn't matter to her. She moved her hands in a broad, sweeping gesture, indicating all her past lives and future lives to come, and then indicated that her present life was about an inch long. She had changed her scope from one life to an aggregate continuing many lives. Seen in the context of that long string of small images. Her present life seemed very small and of all little consequence, so it didn't matter to her that she still had a phobia, and she felt much better. The past life regression process creates an experience of having had many lives. In order to think of all those lives at once, they have to be small, reducing the scope of each life, including the one that the person is now living. This results in dissociation and a lessening of unpleasant feelings, and also pleasant ones. Whether or not past lives exist, we can use scope and category to understand how someone represents the result of using this process. Personally, I have considerable doubt about the validity of past lives and reincarnation. Though if I get to vote, I will certainly vote yes. But if that belief is helpful to someone in living life more happily, I would usually not argue with that. One of the things that help organize my life is the hope that what I do now will make a difference to others in the future generations. But I don't have any more evidence for that than I have for the reality of past lives. Aggregate categorical scope can also be aptly called a perspective pattern, since it can be used to create balanced perspective in which the different related images interact and inform each other. Below is a simple format to gain some experience in doing this. It will be easier if you find someone to assist you by giving you directions. But you can also do this exact exercise alone. It is usually best if you do this in a quiet place where you will not be disturbed for a while. Aggregate categorical scope perspective exercise. Aggregate categorical scope perspective exercise. Pairs, 15 minutes each. First step. Decision. Take a moment to invite your unconscious mind to assist you fully in this entire process. Then think of an important decision that you need to make in the near future, and then set this image aside. Step 2. Relevant scopes. Think of 6 important scopes that have a bearing on this decision. For instance, the likely consequences, both good and bad, possible risk and opportunities. Pessimists tend to leave out the benefits. Optimists tend to omit the risks. Your needs and desires, as well as those of important people in your life, and or anything else that you think is relevant to this decision, until you have 6 different relevant images. It may be helpful to jot down a few words of each image as a reminder of what they are. Third step. Place images. Now, put these images into fairly large round circles, arranged in a circle in your mind, leaving an empty circle of the same size in the middle. fourth step. Add decision image. Now add your image of the decision into that empty space in the middle of the circle or circles. And take some time to simply experience what it is like for you to see all these 7 images together at once. You may find that the images change somewhat as a result of this arrangement. They may even interact with each other as if they were having a conversation without words. Or they may shift position, or get a little larger or smaller, or change content. The color or some other element of one image may transfer to another image, or they may do something else. Just take some time to watch as they do whatever they do, and find out what you can learn from this. People often consider the different factors in an important decision, one at a time sequentially. When they are attending to one factor, the others are temporarily ignored, and the different factors can't be considered together. Seeing them all together simultaneously brings them together into a category so that they can be thought of all at once. Seeing them all together simultaneously brings them together into a category so that they can be thought of all at once. The different factors have an opportunity to interact and inform each other in a process that is largely unconscious, because it is too complex and rapid to language to express. However, you can observe some of this process as the images shift and change, and often reach some kind of resolution of partial resolution. You can use this same structure in a number of other ways. You can use the center circle for an image of an annoying behavior of a spouse or friend, and put images of the qualities, behaviors, or attitudes that you value in that person in the surrounding circles. The center circle can be used for reviewing a past decision that you now regret. Use the outside circles for information relevant to it, including both the prior events and the consequences, your knowledge at that time, what you learned later, etc., in order to be better prepared the next time you need to make a similar decision. For someone who tends to buy impulsively, the center circle can be used for a possible purchase, using the outside circles for images of other things or activities that could be purchased for roughly the same amount of money, or an image of how much time and effort it takes you to earn that amount of money. One or more of the outside circles could be used to include images of other people who would be affected by the purchase, both positively and or negatively. For someone who makes decisions without considering the views of other family members, the center circle could be used for decision, using the outer circles for images of family members or others who would be affected by the decision. Aggregate categorical scope extends what we actually perceive in a moment in time to include lots of information from other examples in the same category. When we assign an experience to an appropriate category, and the category contains valid examples. This can be a very useful augmentation of experience. However, if we assign an experience to an inappropriate category, or the examples in that category are inaccurate, the same process can lead us to misunderstanding and responses that are not useful. Aggregate categorical scope is a very powerful element in contributing to the strength of a category, our confidence that it is true. More examples typically make a category stronger, both because of the variety of content and also through the sheer number of examples. Someone who feels very confident about a particular skill or ability will have many examples of doing that skill in a wide range of different situations and conditions. Unfortunately, the same is true of someone who is described as depressed. That category will accumulate many examples of whatever it is that makes them feel bad. Failures, inhumanity, pains, or other troubles, and the sheer number of examples will be very convincing evidence that the situation is hopeless. Like any other process, aggregate scope can be either enriching or misleading and dangerous, depending on how we use it. For instance, at just past 70, I'm certainly aware of being old, and a variety of aches and stiffness repeatedly remind me of this. Even when I don't think of that large number, this categorization is repeatedly confirmed by experiences of forgetfulness, stumbles, dropping, or spilling things, and other signs of the kind of physical and mental deterioration associated with age. However, if I observe small children, young adults, and others, I see them doing many of the same things, and they certainly aren't old and decrepit. However, if I observe small children, young adults, and others, I see them doing many of the same things, and they certainly aren't old and decrepit. These serve as welcome reminders that weaken my categorization of myself as old, which is an aggregate of many different experiences, only some of which actually apply to me specifically. When this category precedes scope, up to this point I have mostly assumed that scope is primary and precedes categorization. Since we categorize scopes of experience, that seems to be a reasonable assumption. If we had no scopes to categorize, how could we categorize anything? However, this chapter and the previous one have pointed out how much scope and category are intertwined, each affecting the other in a very rapid and circular process. Now it is time to at least question the assumption that scope is primary and examine situation in which categorization precedes a scope that is categorized. In the first chapter, I described how our senses and the neurology are structurally preset to categorize certain aspects of events around us in ways that must have assisted the survival and reproduction of our ancestors. For instance, colors are preset psychological categories that make it easier to distinguish different objects around us. Ripe fruit from green, an animal from the surrounding vegetation, etc. No matter how much we know about the senses and neurology, we inescapably sense certain wavelengths of light as blue and others as red or yellow. The categorization that is embodied in our senses and neurology certainly precede the experiences that we have. If you come into the view of an infant, she or he will usually lock their eyes on yours and follow when you move. This is as true of an unknown child in a supermarket as it is of your own children, so it doesn't depend on an established relationship. Experiments have shown that infants appear to have a preset category that we might call face. They respond to images of real faces, but not to rearranged faces, composed of the same number of eyes, mouth, and nose. Presumably, this kind of eye contact resulted in adults taking better care of infants, promoting survival. Presumably, this kind of eye contact resulted in adults taking better care of infants, promoting survival. The categories that we have learned tend to work in the same way. They become preset pigeonholes into which we automatically put experiences. The categories that we have learned tend to work in the same way. They become preset pigeonholes into which we automatically put experiences, usually with little or no conscious thought. Once categories have become established, they are prior to the later experiences that we encountered. Our comprehension of our native language is an example. It is nearly impossible to hear it without responding to the categories of sounds, words, syntax, etc., and extract its meaning. Any kind of prejudice, negative or positive, whether it is directed at food, music, cars, or people, is an example of a learned preset category that needs only a small sensory input to confirm it. As we go through life, we tend to notice one or two qualities of an event, quickly categorize it, and dismiss it. As a result, it often takes some effort to see something familiar in a new way and categorize it differently, what is often called originality, humor, creativity, or thinking outside the box. When you understand these different aspects of how we categorize, you can use this to monitor how you are categorizing, so that you can change scope when a present category leads you where you don't want to go, or you just want to go somewhere better. Summary: categorization of a sensory-based experience enlarges the scope and enriches our experience in three somewhat different ways. Observed categorical scope specifies the general extent, in both space and time, of the scope that we observe. When we identify an experience as a member of a category, deduced categorical scope is created by using the criteria for a category to deduce and attribute additional characteristics that we don't actually perceive. Although it is a very useful skill, it is also the basis for prejudice and other misleading conclusions. Aggregate categorical scope. When we assign an experience to a category, it becomes associated with and combined with all the other different examples in the category, including the prototype of the category that provides the meaning for it. When an experience is assigned to an appropriate category, this process enriches it. But if it is assigned to an inappropriate category, the same process can be misleading and troublesome. Once we develop categories, they precede the experiences that we have, serving as preset ways of categorizing new experiences in old ways. Although very useful, it also makes it difficult to recategorize experience and respond to events in new and creative ways. Next, we will examine values, which are categories of experience that are important to us in some way. We have many different values. In order to satisfy them all, we need to have some way of organizing them. The intuitive minds. The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. Albert Einstein.